The Scrum Guide Expansion Pack overview. In the next 10 minutes or so, we will go through the entire Scrum Guide Expansion Pack, and I'll be breaking down for you what exactly this is. But let's start off talking about why this additional document. You might already know about the Scrum Guide that was written by this guy over here, Jeff Sutherland, and Ken Schwaber, who is not on the screen. The Scrum Guide, which you can find at scrumguides.org, was intentionally short, and it kept Scrum lightweight and adaptable, and everyone loved it. However, many practitioners struggled with applying Scrum in complex real-world contexts, in enterprises, in regulated environments, or even with AI tools. And enter this document called the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack. So when you think about it, the Expansion Pack adds supportive theories, clarifications, and extensions while keeping Scrum's core intact. You can think about it as what the guide would say if it were allowed to be longer. So the purpose is to help Scrum teams, leaders, and organizations apply Scrum effectively in complex work by offering additional concepts, systems thinking, discovery, leadership models, and AI augmentation. Moving on to this view of Scrum in a nutshell, which you see here. In a nutshell, we talk about a 3-5-3 configuration for Scrum: 3 roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts. And we can say that Scrum is a framework for solving complex adaptive problems. We have time-boxed iterations known as sprints that produce usable increments. The team, the Scrum team that is self-managing, it's cross-functional, and they collaborate relentlessly with stakeholders. The supporting theory of Scrum is complexity, which would be linear planning could fall into complex domains. Scrum enables adaptation. We also talk about emergence. Solutions emerge over time via feedback loops. Other supporting theories here are self-management. Teams decide how to achieve goals, which fosters ownership. Something else to think about is the concept of professionalism. And Scrum is not just meetings. It requires discipline. It requires accountability. It also requires quality. Other thoughts and theories here that you'll explore in this document are lean thinking, the concept of removing waste, the concept of optimizing the flow and delivering value fast. Also very big is the concept of empiricism. And as you go down these pages, you will find more and more information about each one I'm covering. When we talk about empiricism, we're basing decisions on evidence, not speculation. We are basing our decisions on evidence that we get as we go through processes ourselves, as we go through experiences ourselves. Also talked about here is cadence, and cadence just means regular rhythm. We have sprints, we have sprint reviews, we have sprint retrospectives, and that creates predictability and reduces chaos. Then we get into the concept of the 3 pillars, a TIA factor, I call it: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. When we talk about transparency, we mean everyone sees the same facts. When we talk about inspection, we're talking about frequent checkups on progress and product. And when we talk about adaptation, we mean we adjust our course quickly as reality changes. The Scrum values are as follows: commitment, We have that one over here. Focus, openness, commitment, courage, and respect. So let's just talk about these, not in strict order, but just at large. So when we talk about focus, we mean prioritize the sprint goal and avoid distraction. When we talk about openness, we mean sharing challenges, progress, and setbacks. When we talk about commitment, we're talking about the team committing to goals, not just tasks. When we talk about courage, we mean addressing problems honestly, experimenting, and innovating. And when we talk about respect, we talk about honoring diverse skills and perspectives. So, in summary, all of these values turn Scrum practices into a culture as opposed to just a checklist. And this is the hard part of Scrum that a lot of people encounter because they weren't expecting that it would be this hard. But it can be very challenging, especially when those values are not upheld. Moving on, still talking about expanded theory here. Let's talk about product thinking. Product thinking has become pretty big. And when we talk about a product, it says in the document a product is the conduit to deliver value, balancing the short and long term. And this is why Scrum, as a product owner and not a project owner, a lot of people wrestle with the understanding of product mindedness versus project mindedness. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of this document to eliminate the minds of those project-oriented people reading this. Products are long-term and need to be taken care of for the entire existence. But a project, it's a one-time, time-boxed event. Projects have a beginning and an end. A product continues for the life of that product. So product thinking, as it says in this document, deals with the tension that products often need to focus on growth in the short term, but also need to address long-term concerns, gaining traction with early adopters, crossing the chasm, expanding, updating product versions, continuous change, customer lifetime value, and total cost of ownership. So as you see this challenge, it's important that you see products as a piece of a larger product thinking. So you have the product thinking in which you look at products as being outcomes and value, not just features. You are encouraged to avoid feature factories because it's not just about churning out features. The product owner needs to master the art of handling trade-offs between the here and now and the anticipated future. So if I were you and I'm a product owner or even just a product person, you need to read this in more detail. You also need to read this even if you are a product person to have a more robust understanding. It says on this page, for products, Scrum supports feasibility, usability, desirability, value, and viability within ethical boundaries through product design, product management, intentional consideration of cohesive interplay of stakeholders, research, goals, discovery, design, delivery, and continuous value realization. And in the case of technology products, through product engineering. So I encourage you to think about this in more detail. Also, in this expanded theory section, we have systems thinking, and the overarching idea needs to be this: problems don't exist in isolation. Teams must consider organizational, market, and customer systems. So look at the greater whole, not just a piece in it. For complex work, it's not always possible to link cause and effect, except in hindsight, but it's helpful to consider possible and actual upstream cross-stream, and downstream effects with a little bit more systems thinking. Then we get into discovery, learning and experimentation, prototyping, hypothesis testing, all that good stuff, and preventing of waste. When we talk about leadership here, leadership is the ability to influence. As my mentor John Maxwell would say, the true measure of leadership is influence. And that is what they bring out here, that leadership is the ability to influence, to guide and inspire a group of people to achieve a common goal. So leadership is a dynamic social process, and Scrum strives for a particular leadership that is leadership for resilience, a set of qualities, not a management position. And for that reason, leadership needs to include, but is not limited to, cultivating the environment for self-managing Scrum teams. So leaders serve teams, they create psychological safety, and they unblock. They do not command and control. Also here on this next page, we have first principles thinking. And first principles thinking is a method of problem solving that involves breaking down challenges into their most fundamental truth and discovering solutions from the ground up, instead of relying on analogy or established conventions. This approach asks, what do we know for certain? And reconstructs understanding and solutions from those basic elements. And examples are given. So when you think about principles first principles thinking, break the problem into fundamentals, and then rebuild solutions. Lastly, in this section, we have people and change. And here, you got to recognize that transformation is emotional. You got to manage resistance. You got to lead through that resistance. And then you got to celebrate wins and build resilience. Here we get into the Scrum roles in the expansion pack. And there are some roles that have been brought to the surface, and some of these are obvious. One is stakeholder. We don't necessarily use that word a lot in the Scrum Guide, but here in the expanded roles, we see that the stakeholders are not passive observers. They co-create value by giving feedback and aligning priorities. Then we come over here to supporter, which is really fleshed out nicely. And a supporter is an individual outside the Scrum team who enables success. An example could be legal or finance or IT. Next, we come over to artificial intelligence. We're not necessarily seeing this as an agent per se, but we're seeing this as an augmentation role. AI can analyze data, it can simulate outcomes, or optimize backlogs, but it should not replace human judgment. And this is what I've said for the longest time. We always need to defer to the Agile Manifesto, values and principles. So through this work, we've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools like AI. So can AI do thinking if you ask it to think for you? It can, but you as the human in the loop, you shouldn't let AI replace human judgment. Moving on to product developer. This is broader than developer, and this includes all creators, designers, testers, analysts. All these individuals accountable for delivering high quality increments. Here we have product owner, and the product owner owns value delivery, not just backlog items. This role needs strong decision-making authority. And lastly, we have the Scrum Master. Beyond facilitation, the Scrum Master creates conditions for agility, they coach leaders, and drive cultural change. And that takes us to the next section here, which is on Scrum artifacts. So you already know we have that 3-5-3 in Scrum, 3 roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts. Well, here we expand the artifacts slightly. Number 1, we look at the word product. Remember, we could also say potentially shippable increment, which wouldn't be the whole thing. But here, we're looking at product as the whole system, not just a series of increments. Then we're also looking, let's move on to this next page. We're also looking at commitments. So when it comes to commitments, we're talking about the outcome done. And when we talk about outcome done, we're talking about desired impact achieved, customer value. Then when we talk about output done, we're talking about deliverables completed. There's a difference between a desired impact achieved versus a deliverable completed. You could complete deliverables and still not get a desired impact. So that is important to distinguish one from another. And inside the document itself, we have a definition of increment. We also have the DOD, the definition of done, talked about, the definition of output done, and the definition of outcome is very important. Okay, moving on, we have product backlog. So here, this would be under backlogs. Under backlogs, we have a dynamic list of needs. That's your product backlog. Under backlog items, we understand that we must define both acceptance criteria, which is measurable, and outcome criteria, which is value oriented. Okay, also here we have the concept of just aligning the vision. It's important that we understand that the vision must be aligned, and the backlog connects to long-term product vision. The sprint backlog is also important here once again. So we got to plan the sprint backlog for one sprint, and we got to understand it's owned by developers. The sprint goal is focused for the sprint, and it guides trade-offs and decision making. All right, moving on to the next piece here, we have Scrum events. And remember, we had 5. So here we have the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the retrospective. So we understand the sprint is a container for everything else. Sprint planning is where we establish the purpose of the sprint, the what, select backlog items, and the how. Developers decide execution approach. We have the daily Scrum, where we make quick alignment, adjust the plan to stay on track. We have the sprint review, collaborating with stakeholders to inspect outcomes. And lastly, the retrospective. So there they are, sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and sprint retrospective. Also here we have the concept of multi-Scrum team products. Now this could be extremely helpful for those who are thinking of needing to somewhat scale. If a Scrum team becomes too large, it should be considered reorganizing into multiple cohesive Scrum teams, each focused on the same product. So here we talk about when many teams work on one product, they should align on a single product goal and vision. And then we should manage dependencies intentionally. We should ensure increments integrate seamlessly to avoid many waterfalls, and we should use coordination forums, but we should avoid bureaucracy. And that is all here, page 30, and all the way down. And then we get towards the end, and we get into these endnotes, acknowledgements. We have Scrum expanded on one page, and all of these little pieces over here, they give you an idea of what exactly has been done and what has been massaged in this document. So over here in this section, we have an expansion log. We go into the appendices, and I'll just give you a high-level overview of those appendices. So we have adaptive enterprise. It's a concept as well. Organizations must become adaptive beyond budgeting, ditch rigid annual budgets, humanocracy, flatten hierarchies, sociocracy, distributed decision making through circles, and consent. Executive behavior, leaders must model transparency. And you can find all of these in here, right? Immunity to change, frameworks for overcoming hidden resistance. Intent-based leadership, as you can see here, IBL. And the summary of that is leaders push authority down, enabling autonomy. Okay. And the Sinafin framework, which enables the categorization of problems into simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And emergent strategy. Strategy evolves based on learning and feedback, not rigid planning. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. There's a lot more in here, but we'll just try to keep it simple, and I would recommend go read it for yourself. Okay, that is the Scrum Guide Expansion Pack at a super high level. I hope it gave you some insights about what is in here, and if you want to read it for yourself, you can find it at scrumexpansion.org, and all the information is there. All right, my friends. Well, thank you for joining. Thank you for listening, and all the very best. Bye for now.